to Marshall Knows Stuff. I'm Marshall, and I know stuff. Stick around and I'll show you how to know some of the stuff that I know. There was a video floating around on Facebook a few months ago about how to make a mini sword out of a nail, or a couple of nails actually. It intrigued me and I gave it a shot, and it doesn't turn out that it was as easy as the video made it look. Through trial and error, I figured out how to actually do it, and I'm going to show you how to do it. If you attempted it yourself, you probably ended up with some pieces like this. Common one, the drill at the center, breaking the handle right off of there. And then also, another mistake that I made before I nailed it was that I hammered way too thin. A couple of fails before I finally ended up with this. So I'm going to show you how to successfully make a mini sword out of a nail. Now, I'm starting with this 4-inch nail. It's going to give me enough steel to work with. That'll be the base of the sword. One of my secret weapons in doing this is the ball peen hammer. The reason is, when you start to hammer your nail out, you don't want to hammer it out flat. It has to come to a point at either side. I'm going to make it a double-edged sword. You have to start hammering it at the edge and not just flat. So I will start to flatten it out a little bit, but then I'm going to use the back side, the ball side of the ball peen hammer, to start getting the edge flatter. And then that way I'm not going to end up with a too flat blade. It's going to be strong in the middle and then taper down to the sides. I want to point out, though, one thing that the original video did that I figured out was the wrong way of going about it, was the drilling the hole through the nail to begin with for the Keon, your handguard. If you drill the hole through the nail and then start working the steel, I guarantee it's going to split. There's not a lot of steel there, and once you start really working it, it's going to break. So I don't drill it until after my blade is already all the way hammered out. Let's get to heating it and hammering this puppy out. It's starting to look pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start taking in the edges, start hammering out the edges, and I'm going to heat it from one side so I can start tapping that edge out. I'm going to do it one side and then flip it over and then move down a little bit and flip it over so it stays relatively symmetrical. You'll notice that as I hammer one side, it starts to make these little dips in it. So what I'm doing is I'm hammering where I see a little dip. I heat up that side, and then I hammer that out to where by the time I get to the very bottom, it's going to be a relatively perpendicular, or parallel lines on either side. But I'm just eyeballing it and hammering it wherever I see a little indentation. Another thing I want to point out, the reason that I'm at this point where I'm hammering either side is if you look at it lengthwise, it's a relative uniform thickness all the way through. You see the thickness that we started at down here, that is the original thickness of the nail, and then I hammered it all out until it's a uniform thickness all the way through. Once you have that uniform thickness, then you can switch it over to the side, and you know that you're not getting too thin anywhere through here. You can just start hammering out the sides at either side, and that'll start tapering your edge down either way. So, as I'm looking at it, you want to make sure that you're straight this way. One of the big problems is whenever you start hammering it out, your blade will fall to one side or the other on the handle. So I like to hammer it out, make sure that I've got that straight. And you need to make sure both your sides are parallel. Now that we have the general shape and thickness that we want on our blade, we're going to start making it look like a real sword. The fast and easy way to do this, belt sander. Like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a double-edged sword. So what I want to happen is to file each side to where whenever you're looking at it right from the front, it's going to look like a diamond. So I'm going to hit each side with a belt sander to start to grind it down and get that diamond shape that we're looking for from the front. Once you drill your hole through, make sure that it's square. This one looks like it's pretty well square. Make sure that whenever you drill it through, it looks perpendicular. Because if it's not perpendicular, your hilt's gonna, or your keon's gonna be off one way or the other. I put it in the vise over and over to make sure that I'm still square. Everything is still square. It's actually not a bad idea to do this over and over while you're hammering it out. Yep, that's about as far as I want to go because that gets really fragile. So fragile, in fact, that I decided to scrap that whole idea. I happen to have this cotter pin sitting around that's the perfect size. So I'm going to cut that off and shape that instead of trying to shape my other nail. Alright, this is about as fancy as I want to get with the keon because you have to keep in mind that you're going to stab it through your very fragile blade and then have to duplicate this side on the other. So the more intricate you get on this side, the more difficulty you'll have on this side trying to get that the same shape while it's already in the sword. Now that we've got this, I know what you're saying. But Marshall, it looks like we already have a mini sword that's made out of a nail. And you wouldn't be too far off from the truth. But good is not good enough. We're going to keep working on this. But I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to stop now, because this next part sucks. Seriously, so boring and it takes so long. We're going to start the process of polishing the blade. And to do this, I'm going to use a natural whetstone, and we're just going to start working the blade over and over on the whetstone. I'm going to go ahead and move over to the time lapse because seriously, this takes forever. I'm going to just do this first part of it. I'm going to start with about 3,000 grit stone, and I'm going to get the first start of the polish going on, and then I'm going to actually harden the blade. I haven't hardened yet, and the reason I haven't hardened it yet is because I would be really swimming against the current to try to polish this blade after it was hardened. It's still warm and malleable, and I haven't locked in the molecules that are going to harden it by quenching it, so it's still going to be a lot more workable now. I'm going to do the first process of the polishing, then we're going to harden it, and then we're going to finish polishing. Now you can see I'm pretty well polished on both sides. To begin with, only use the 3,000 grit, and I'm going to go ahead and harden the steel now before I finish the polish to make it nice and shiny. Now last step, it takes a really long time, and it's important to be thorough in it because you're going to notice right away if you have any low spots, and it's going to get rid of those low spots on the blade. As you work the blade back and forth over your whetstone, it's going to even all the sides out. Now I'm going to get the whole blade red hot, and I'm going to dip it into motor oil to quench it. You have all these excited atoms and from the heat, and whenever you dip it in the motor oil, they close in together real quick. A lot of people they claim that quenching your steel in motor oil will add carbon to it, and I don't know that I necessarily prescribe to that idea, because there's just no real means of conveyance for the carbon to get into the steel. You have your molecules that are going to be closing in real quick, and you're just dipping it in, and there's not really a way for the carbon to get inside. But I'm going to use it anyway because I've got like 100 cars with 1,000,000 miles on it, so I'm never in short supply of motor oil. So I'm just going to go ahead and use that. Once I get the whole blade red hot, I'll show you another trick real quick while I'm at it. If you get your steel hot enough, you can get a magnet, and it's not going to stick to your steel. See how that sticks to it? It's not hot enough. So if you put your magnet on it, it's sticking to it, get it hotter. Once it gets hot enough, once it gets to the right hotness, then the magnet's not going to stick to it, and that's when you want to quench it. Not sticking now. Smells like motor oil. Looks like we're doing pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish polishing the blade, and then we're going to go ahead and put the key on through and hammer that out. So as you can see, just from that 10,000 grit, it really shines that thing up a lot. You can see some inconsistencies, and the reason I'm stopping right now is just keeping the consistent angle on it. As I'm polishing each edge, it's already getting a pretty good sharpness to it, and I just barely skipped on the whetstone, and it drove it right into my thumb. So I'm gonna stop polishing it for now. I'm actually probably just gonna throw this one in the trash after I'm done. I'm just doing this one for demonstration purposes only. But you get the point. That's gets a really good polish on there, and also that high polish gives it a really good edge. That's getting pretty sharp already. So I'll just go ahead and move on from the polishing point because it's, you know, long and drawn out, and you get the point. So all right, now we have our key on in, and then I gave it a little bit of a polish with the Dremel too, and then like I said, I ground down the head of the nail a little bit to make the hilt. It's pretty self-explanatory. I just hit it with the belt sander, so I didn't really figure you'd need to see that. Do it different shapes or however you want to do that. And for the very last step, I'm going to be wrapping the handle. I just have this hobby thread that I got from Hobby Lobby. I'm going to use to wrap it. And the way that I start it, it's going to be the same way that they do on Japanese straight razors, the kamisori, and I've wrapped my own kamisori. Start the bottom and pull it all the way up. And I'm actually going to be starting it above where the Keon is. It's going to help hold it in place, and it's going to cover up some of that hammer marks where it didn't get polished. I think it kind of adds to the look of the blade in doing that, but it's going to get tucked away a little bit more. So what you do is you pull it all the way up, and then where you want to start it, hold it there, and you're going to wrap it around. And as you start wrapping it, it's going to hold that in place.
Scoot it up as you go. Keep it nice and tight. Check the back side too. Make sure it looks as good on the back as it does on the front. Keep it consistent.
Now that we're at the end, I'll show you how to keep it wrapped. Similar way as we kept it wrapped to begin with, what I'm going to do is leave this side out. To make sure it stays out, I'm going to put it under my thumb right here. Then what I'm going to do is going to start twisting it around so that I keep wrapping it around the handle, but it's also wrapping around this last bit that's going to be sticking out. Right to the very bottom. I'm done wrapping it. I'm going to pull this tight, and it's going to stay in there nice and tight, and then I can just trim it off with the nail clippers. That's why I got the nail clippers, to trim this, actually, because it gets right up against it and trims it to where you can't even see it. It's a little bit more light. Now you can see it's nice and wrapped. There we go. A mini sword out of a nail. Now you might be thinking that because it's so small, the mini sword is a haphazard way to start smithing, but actually quite the opposite is true. Because it's so small, you have to take a lot of time and patience with it. But it is a good starting point, because all you're at risk of losing is a 4-inch nail, just pennies, instead of good hunk of Damascus or something like that. So I would recommend it if you're starting out smithing. This is a fun little project to do, and it teaches you a lot about what you need to do with your striking and heating, and just the basic physical properties of what you need to do for smithing. So remember, like, subscribe, tell your friends, and let's keep knowing some stuff.